everybody. Today the Bookworms are going to be reading The BFG by Roald Dahl and illustrated by Quentin Blake. Chapter 16, Mixing the Dream. It was dark now. The night had already begun. The BFG with Sophie sitting on his hand hurried into the cave and put on those brilliant blinding lights that seemed to come from nowhere. He placed Sophie on the table. "Stay there, please," he said. "And no chittering. I's needing to listen only to silence when I's mixing up such a naughty, plexicated dream as this." He hurried away from her. He got out an enormous empty glass jar that was the size of a washing machine. He clutched it to his chest and hurried towards the shelves on which stood the thousands and thousands of smaller jars containing the captured dreams. "Dreams about giants," he muttered to himself as he searched the labels. "The giant is guzzling human beings. No, not that one. Nor that one. Here's one, and here's another." He grabbed the jars and unscrewed the tops. He tipped the dreams into the enormous jar he was clutching, and as each one went in, Sophie caught a glimpse of a small sea-green blob tumbling from one jar into another. The BFG hurried towards another shelf. "Now," he muttered, "I is wanting dreams about giggle houses for girls and about boggle boxes for boys." He was becoming very tense now. Sophie could almost see the excitement bubbling inside him as he scurried back and forth among his beloved jars. There must have been 50,000 dreams altogether up there on the shelves, but he seemed to know almost exactly where every one of them was. "Dreams about a little girl," he muttered. "And dreams about me, about the BFG. Come on, hurry up, get on with it. Now where in the wonky world is I keeping those?" And so it went on. In about half an hour, the BFG had found all the dreams he wanted and had tipped them into the one huge jar. He put the jar on the table. Sophie sat watching him, but he said nothing. Inside the big jar, lying on the bottom of it, she could see clearly about 50 of those oval sea-green jelly shapes, all pulsing gently in and out, some lying on top of others, but each one was still a quite separate individual dream. "Now we is mixing them," the BFG announced. He went to the cupboard where he kept his bottles of Fropscottle, and from it he took out a gigantic egg beater. It was one of those that with the handle which you turn, and down below there are a lot of overlapping blades that go whizzing around. He inserted the bottom end of this contraption into the big jar where the dreams were lying. "Watch," he said. He started turning the handle very fast. Flashes of green and blue exploded inside the jar. The dreams were being whisked into a sea-green froth. "The poor things!" Sophie cried. "They is not feeling it," the BFG said, as he turned the handle. "Dreams is not like human beings or animals. They has no brains. They's made of zosimus." After about a minute, the BFG stopped whisking. The whole bottle was now full of the brim with large bubbles. They were almost exactly like the bubbles we ourselves blow from the soapy water, except that these had been even brighter and more beautiful colors swimming on their surfaces. "Keep watching," the BFG said. Quite slowly, the topmost bubble rose up through the neck of the jar and floated away. A second one followed, then a third and a fourth. Soon the cave was filled with hundreds of beautifully colored bubbles, all drifting gently through the air. It was truly a wonderful sight. As Sophie watched them, they all started floating towards the cave entrance, which was still open. "They're going out," Sophie whispered. "Of course," the BFG said. "Where to?" "Those is all little tiny dreams bits that I isn't using," the BFG said. "They's going back to the misty country to join up with proper dreams." "It's all a bit beyond me," Sophie said. "Dreams is full of mystery and magic," the BFG said. "Do not try to understand them. Look in the big bottle and you will now see the dream you was wanting for the Queen." Sophie turned and stared into the great jar. On the bottom of it, something was thrashing around wildly, bouncing up and down and flinging itself against the walls of the jar. "Good heavens!" she cried. "Is that it?" That's it, the BFG said proudly. But it's horrible, Sophie cried. It's jumping about. It wants to get out. That's because it's a trogglehumper, the BFG said. It's a nightmare. Oh, but I don't want to give the queen a nightmare, Sophie cried. If she is dreaming about giants guzzling up little boys and girls, then what is you expecting it to be except a nightmare? BFG said. Oh no, Sophie cried. Oh yes, the BFG said. A dream where you is seeing little chidlers being eaten is about the most frightsome troggle-humping dream you can get. It's a kicksy bog thumper. It's a wopsy grop switcher. It is all of them riddled into one. It is as bad as that dream I blew into the flesh lump eater this afternoon. It is worse. Sophie stared down at the fearful nightmare dream that was still thrashing away in the huge glass jar. It was much larger than the others. It was about the size and shape of, shall we say, a turkey's egg. It was jellyish. It had tinges of bright scarlet deep inside it. There was something terrible about the way it was throwing itself against the sides of the jar. I don't want to give the queen a nightmare, Sophie said. I is thinking, the BFG said, that your queen will be happy to have a nightmare if having a nightmare is going to save a lot of human beings from being gobbled up by filthsome giants. Is I right or left? I suppose you're right, Sophie said. It's got to be done. She will soon be getting over it, the BFG said. Have you put all the other important things into it? Sophie asked. When I's blowing that dream into the queen's bedroom, the BFG said, she will be dreaming every single little thing-a-ling-a-ling you was asking me to make her dream. About me sitting on the windowsill? That part of it is very strong. And about a big friendly giant? I's putting in a nice long gobbet about him, the BFG said. As he spoke, he picked up one of his smaller jars and very quickly tipped the struggling, thrashing trogglehumper out of the large jar into the small one. Then he screwed the lid tightly onto the small jar. That's it, he announced. We is now ready. He fetched a suitcase and put the small jar into it. Why bother to take a great big suitcase when you've only got one jar? Sophie said. You could put the jar in your pocket. The BFG looked down at her and smiled. By goggles, he said, taking the jar out of the suitcase. Your head is not quite so full of grim sludge after all. I can see you was not born last week. Thank you, kind sir, Sophie said, making a little curtsy from the tabletop. Is you ready to leave? The BFG asked. I'm ready, Sophie cried. Her heart was beginning to thump at the thought of what they were about to do. It really was a wild and crazy thing. Perhaps they would both be thrown into prison. The BFG was putting on his great black cloak. He tucked the jar into a pocket of his cloak. He picked up his long trumpet-like dream blower. Then he turned and looked at Sophie, who was still on the tabletop. The dream bottle is in my pocket, he said. You was going to sit there with it during the travel. Never, cried Sophie. I refuse to sit next to that beastly thing. Then where is you going to sit? The BFG asked her. Sophie looked him over for a few moments. Then she said, If you would be kind enough to swivel one of your lovely big ears so that it is lying flat like a dish, that would make a very cozy place for me to sit. By gumbo! That is a squawkling good idea, the BFG said. Slowly, he swiveled his huge right ear until it was like a great shell facing the heavens. He lifted Sophie up and placed her onto it. The ear itself, which was about the size of a large tea tray, was full of the same channels and crickles as a human ear. It was extremely comfortable. I hope I don't fall into your ear hole, Sophie said, edging away from the large hole just beside her. Be very careful not to do that, the BFG said. You would be giving me a cronking earache. The nice thing about being there was that she could whisper directly into his ear. You was tickling me a bit, the BFG said. Please do not jiggle about. I'll try not to, Sophie said. Are we ready? Owie! Yelled the BFG. Don't do that. I didn't do anything, Sophie said. You was talking too loud. You was forgetting that I's hearing every little thing-a-ling-a-ling 50 times louder than usual, and there you was shouting right away inside my ear." "Oh, gosh," Sophie murmured. "I forgot that. Your voice is sounding like thunder and trumpets." "I'm so sorry," Sophie said. "Is that better?" "No," cried the BFG. "It sounds as though you were shooting off a blunderbuss." "Then how can I talk to you?" Sophie whispered. "Don't," cried the poor BFG. "Please don't. Each word is like you was dropping buzz bombs in my ear hole." Sophie tried speaking right under her breath. "Is this better?" she said. She spoke so softly she couldn't even hear her own voice. "That's better," the BFG said. "Now I's hearing you very nicely. What is it you was trying to say to me just now?" "I was saying, are we ready?" "We is off," cried the BFG, heading for the cave entrance. "We is off to meet Her Majesty the Queen." Outside the cave, he rolled the large stone back into place and set off at a tremendous gallop. Chapter 17. Journey to London. The great yellow wasteland lay dim and milky in the moonlight as the big friendly giant went galloping across it. Sophie, still wearing her nightie, was reclining comfortably in a crevice of the BFG's right ear. She was actually in the outer rim of the ear, near the top, where the edge of the ear folds over. And this folding over bit made sort of a roof for her and gave her a wonderful protection against the rushing wind. What is more, she was lying on skin that was soft and warm and almost velvety. Nobody, she told herself, had ever traveled in greater comfort. Sophie peeped over the rim of the ear and watched the desolate landscape of giant country go whizzing by. They were certainly moving fast. The BFG went bouncing off the ground as though they were rockets in his toes, and each stride he took lifted him about 100 feet into the air. But he had not yet gone into that whizzing top gear of his. When the ground became blurred by speeding and the wind howled in his feet, didn't seem to be touching anything but air. That would come later. Sophie had not slept for a long time. She was very tired. She was also warm and comfortable. She dozed off. She didn't know how long she slept, but when she woke up again and looked over the edge of the ear, the landscape had changed completely. They were in a green country now, with mountains and forests. It was still dark, but the moon was shining as brightly as ever. Suddenly, and without slowing his pace, the BFG turned his head sharply to the left. For the first time during the entire journey, he spoke a few words. "Look! Quick, quick! Over there!" he said, pointing his long trumpet. Sophie looked in the direction he was pointing. Through the murky darkness, all she saw at first was a great cloud of dust about 300 yards away. "Those is the other giants all galloping back home from after their guzzle," the BFG said. Then Sophie saw them. In the light of the moon, she saw all 9 of those monstrous half-naked brutes thundering across the landscape together. They were galloping in a pack, their necks craned forward, their arms bent at the elbows, and worst of all, their stomachs bulging. The strides they took were incredible. Their speed was unbelievable. Their feet pounded and thundered on the ground and left a great sheet of dust behind them. But in 10 seconds, they were gone. "A lot of the little girl-sees and boy-sees is no longer sleeping in their beds tonight," the BFG said. Sophie felt quite ill. But this grim encounter made her more than ever determined to go through with her mission. It must have been about an hour or so later that the BFG began to slow his pace. "We is in England now," he said suddenly. Dark though it was, Sophie could see that they were in a country of green fields with neat hedges between the fields. There were hills with trees all over them, and occasionally there were roads with lights of cars moving along. Each time they came to a road, the BFG was over it and away, and no motorist could possibly have seen anything except a quick black shadow flashing overhead. All at once, a curious orange-colored glow appeared in the night sky ahead of him. "We is coming close to London," the BFG said. He slowed to a trot. He began looking about cautiously. Groups of houses were now appearing on all sides, but there were still no lights in their windows. It was too early for anyone to be getting up yet. "Someone's bound to see us," Sophie said. "Never is they seeing me," the BFG said confidently. "You was forgetting that I is doing this sort of thing for years and years. No human being is ever catching even the smallest wink of me." "I did," Sophie whispered. "Ah," he said, Yes, but you is the very first. During the next half hour, things moved so swiftly and so silently that Sophie, crouching in the giant's ear, was unable to understand exactly what was going on. They were in streets. There were houses everywhere. Sometimes there were shops. There were bright lamps in the streets. There were quite a few people about, and there were cars with lights on, but nobody ever noticed the BFG. It was impossible to understand quite how he did it. There was a kind of magic in his movements. He seemed to melt into the shadows. He would glide. That was the only word to describe his way of moving. He would glide noiselessly from one dark place to another, always moving, always gliding forward through the streets of London, his black cloak bending with the shadows of the night. It is quite impossible that one or two late-night wanderers might have thought they saw a tall black shadow swimming swiftly down a murky side street. But even if they had, they would have never have believed their own eyes. They would have dismissed it as an illusion and blamed themselves for seeing things that weren't there. Sophie and the BFG came at last to a large place full of trees. There was a road running through it, and a lake. There were no people in this place, and the BFG stopped for the first time since they had set out from his cave many hours before. "What's the matter?" Sophie whispered in her under-the-breath voice. "Eye's in a bit of a puddle," he said. "You're doing marvelously," Sophie whispered. "No, I isn't," he said. "I is now completely boggled. I is lost." "But why?" "Because we is meant to be in the middle of London, and suddenly we is in green pastures." "Don't be silly," Sophie whispered. "This is the middle of London. It's called Hyde Park. I know exactly where we are." "You was joking." "I'm not. I swear I'm not. We're almost there." "You mean we is nearly at the Queen's Palace?" cried the BFG. "It's just across the road," Sophie whispered. "This is where I take over." "Which way?" the BFG asked. "Straight ahead." The BFG trotted forward through the deserted park. "Now stop!" The BFG stopped. "You see that huge runabout ahead of us just outside the park?" Sophie whispered. "I see it. That is Hyde Park Corner." Even now, when it was still an hour before dawn, there was quite a lot of traffic moving around Hyde Park Corner. Then Sophie whispered, "In the middle of the roundabout, there is an enormous stone arch with a statue of a horse and a rider on top of it. Can you see that?" The BFG peered through the trees. "I is seeing it," he said. "Do you think that if you took a very fast run at it, you could jump clear over Hyde Park Corner, over the arch, and over the horse and the rider, and land on the pavement on the other side?" "Easy," the BFG said. "You're sure? You're absolutely sure?" "I promise," the BFG said. "Whatever you do, you must not land in the middle of Hyde Park Corner." "Don't get so flussed," the BFG said. "To me, that is a snitchy little jump. There's not a thing-a-ling-a-ling to it." "Then go," Sophie whispered. The BFG broke into a full gallop. He went scorching across the park, and just before he reached the railings that divided it from the street, he took off. It was a gigantic leap. He flew over Hyde Park Corner and landed as softly as a cat on the pavement of the other side. "Well done," Sophie whispered. "Now quick, over that wall." Directly in front of them, bordering the pavement, there was a brick wall with fearsome-looking spikes all along the top of it. A swift crouch, a little leap, and the BFG was over it. "We're there," Sophie whispered excitedly. "We're in the Queen's back garden." That's it for today, everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed. The rest of the chapters will be coming soon. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!